was Chris Reeve, just the sweetest, brightest, nicest young kid that ever came into my life.
One always could feel it. There was something about Chris Reeve that was bigger than an actor and bigger than Superman and bigger than his role in the entertainment business, some larger human mission.
Chris Reeve took unbelievable adversity and turned it into an extraordinary opportunity that will have global ramifications forever.
You would have no idea that that man was really disabled because of the work he did. But he was severely disabled, and in spite of that, did incredible, amazing things.
He never thought of himself as a superhero. He didn't. He just thought of himself as a guy that had stuff to do, and he just was able to do a lot and accomplish a lot.
Chris was incredibly adventurous.
His whole life was about, boats and planes and sailing and soccer and all that kind of sort of amazing athletic stuff. And we played tennis, and of course playing tennis with him was a little scary because he was so tall and his serve was like, a bullet.
When we started filming Somewhere in Time, and I came out to Mackinac Island, and Chris was there. We had dinner every day. We became like really close. We just shared everything. He taught me how to sail. He taught me how to fly an airplane.
He swore to me he wouldn't fly while we were shooting because I said, anything happens to you. And one day I met this girl at a dinner party, and she said, oh, I met your actor, Superman. I said, oh, really, where? She said, oh, we met, and he took me away for the weekend. We flew up to Scotland in a little single engine airplane, and we got into a storm, and he was losing fuel, and he had to set down. We landed in this abandoned airport. This girl goes on with this story. My heart's going a mile a minute. She said, and we were there, and there was nobody. We found an old bicycle, and we stole the bicycle, and we rode into town where we found this bus, and we took this bus to a railroad station, and then we got the train back to London so that he could shoot with you the next day. Or the next one, I said, oh, thanks. And he had promised me he wouldn't. So the next day I was coming and said, hey, how you doing, kid? He said, good. I said, how was your weekend? He said, oh, fine. I said, what'd you do? He said, oh, nothing. I said, oh. I said, you didn't fly up to Scotland and lose your gas and he's turning and have to land and get a bicycle and steal that and take a bus and take the train and to get here. He looked at me, all of the above.
Chris seemed like he always did live his life as if who knew what was going to happen tomorrow. And so he was very aggressive, and he wanted to get the most enjoyment out of life.
He was a great pilot, a great sailor, a great pianist. And Chris never did anything by half. If he was going to try something, he would study, 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 and become the best at it.
The thing I remember most about him as a student in Juilliard was that he was serious. He was there to learn acting. And I never knew anyone as beautiful who was less egotistical about that part of his life.
I saw Christopher in a play of Katharine Hepburn's, and I always would see a lot of her in New York through the years. She would have me to tea and dinner. So when I said to her, do you know that Christopher Reeve was in West Side Waltz with you, is going to be Superman? She said, no. She said, how is that beanpole? How is that beanpole ever going to be Superman? Well, that beanpole, I guess, started lifting a lot of weights.
He really electrified the legend of the character even more by his attractiveness as a male model type of guy, but his clarity of performance, the physicality, of course, he brought to it, but he also had the masculinity that the character needed. He had that cutting jaw that was just surreal.
The thing with Chris was that he was brilliant. I mean, he's a really smart guy. And I think, if anything, he would intellectualize about things. So he'd write copious notes about how he would play the scene, what his character's backstory had been, how his character related to this moment.
He took it seriously, and I think it shows in his work, and I think he was maturing as an actor in every film he did.
Lois Lane, say hello to Clark Kent. Told you one Pete.
I just thought he was this kid. He was very serious about playing the part, but he was very, very earnest. He was very concerned he'd be typecast. He read all the stories about George Reeve. So in the sense of his acting that part, he really, really took it very seriously and in a classical way, broke those characters down and made Clark funny and embodied Superman and became Superman for a lot of people and knew enough about the myth to honor that.
There's a scene in Superman, which is a tricky scene, but when we shot it, it was in two separate pieces.
Good night.
And it's where Christopher Reeve, as Superman, leaves Margot Kidder, having just taken her on a flight of fantasy, where she does nothing but melt and fall desperately in love, and he flies away, and in 18 seconds later, there's a knock on her door without a cut.
Lois? Lois? Anybody home? Hello? Lois?
And she goes to the door, and it's Clark Kent. And she looks right at him. She said, "Oh, come in, Clark."
For goodness sake, didn't you hear me knocking?
Well, Christopher made that work for Margot, that he flew away as Superman, and he comes in the door as Clark Kent, and he is two totally different people. That's not acting. That's just life. He brought them both to life in such a wonderful way.
He was a weird guy to hang out with because he was a goofball. But when it came to the work, he was all business. I mean, he was all business. And that probably from the stage or wherever, his background was all that stage. I remember just out of California, it was just like we were up on the wires, and I'm kind of rambling on like I am now, and he just said, "Hey, can you just talk like Jimmy Olsen?" I was like, wow.
And he had this challenge inside of himself all the time. How do I not give away the secret that I'm Clark Kent? How do I not tell this woman, wow, I'm impassioned by you also. Yeah, I'd love to take you in my arms. I mean, all these wonderful little things that were in Chris's head all the time. We would talk about them. So he was playing this quite multi-dimensional.
Just the beginning of the film, I don't know how old he was, but he was like a kid. He seemed to me, he was in early 20s maybe when he did this. And he was a lot younger than I or Dick Donner and others working on it. And every one of us had a sense always of some very important future that this young man was going to have.
In every film, he developed into a better film actor. And I never thought he was, quote, theatrical on film. I can't think of a movie I saw him in when I didn't believe him. And to me, that's the greatest compliment.
Chris's legacy is not only the variety of characters that he fortunately was able to play, but that he always cared so much about humanity. I think he even cared before this tragic incident.
He was riding a horse. I believe he was about to jump, and the horse stopped. But as gravity has it, and physics has it, he went flying forward and fell on his head. Broke his neck at the C1-2 level. He was paralyzed at that point and was ventilator dependent forever.
Here was Chris, this 6'4" giant guy, and then there he was in the chair with the ventilator, but you know what? Those eyes never changed. And that's what I sort of connected on, and very quickly we established a relationship that was just really based on a lot of trust. The first couple of months, even the first 6 months, were more about learning to live with that kind of a severe disability. Dana always said it was like entering another universe, and it was scary. Everything was scary.
There's a quote in his book and a story, I think, that he recollects about being in the hospital and his wife Dana being with him, and they having a discussion about, should I go on or not? And she looked at him and said, you know what, you're still you. And as long as you're you, I'm here with you, and I'm in here for the long haul, and we can do this together. And I think for him, that was a turning point. One of his books is called Still Me. That came from that quote that Dana said.
For someone with whose life had been so changed, it was astounding to see when he could get down, but it would last such a short time, and he was able to get himself out of it. Now, there's no question that Dana and his children were one of the reasons that he was able to pull himself out. Dana was just his rock, and she was always optimistic. The first time we got him home was around Thanksgiving of '95, And so, yeah, I mean, there was this feeling that, oh my gosh, you know, Chris has probably become the most famous disabled person in the world, but we were just sort of learning how to navigate the waters in the beginning.
After the accident, he would have long, long conversations with me. It wouldn't be a 10-minute conversation, it would be like a 2 to 3 hour conversation, and we would just cover everything about life. And so I think what happened is he had a lot of time to think. And because it was so hard for him to speak because of the ventilator, he would really choose his words, and they would be very meaningful words. And we would talk about how he was paralyzed physically, but not mentally. You know, his mind, his spirit, his ideas, his ability to communicate. He said these people would come to him with their problems. And so after a while he said, you know, this is who I am. I'm a different person now. I am receiving other people's problems. I process them. I am their listener. And so he became a man who was incredibly giving.
The terribleness of the accident and the wonderfulness of his recovery gave him a place in his life he never expected to have, which was as a spokesman, as a person who could do good in the world.
Chris started the foundation shortly after he was injured, just because people were sending him checks, I think, you know, to try and help for the cause. And so they set up a not-for-profit organization, figuring that when he got himself home and together, they'd figure out what to do.
One thing he knew he didn't want to do, he didn't want to build buildings, and he didn't want to build buildings with his name on them. All he wanted to do was find the best research out there.
I mean, I was with him when he'd call scientists up and said, I saw your report, you didn't do what you said you were going to do. How come the science isn't going forward? What is stopping you? What is in the way?
I think the overriding thing for Chris was that he wanted to walk again. He wanted his life back, particularly in the beginning. And that was a challenge for us as the foundation because, you know, there was this whole group of the disability community that wanted Chris to be their Uber advocate.
He upset a lot of people in chairs, a lot of disabled people, because, you know, they didn't want him to go out there and say, wait a minute, I'm not satisfied living in a chair. I want to walk again. I am going to walk again. I'm going to find a way to walk again. You know, so he really pissed off a lot of people in his own community by doing that.
I remember the first time that we went on a speaking engagement, I think it was like Chicago, and one of the organizers came in and said, there's protesters outside. I was like, protesters? What are they who are they protesting? They're like, they're protesting Chris. And lo and behold, there were people in wheelchairs with placards that said, you know, Christopher Reeve believes in cure him or kill him. And Chris and I sort of realized that we did need to put a face on both of those movements, the cure movement and the disability rights movement.
He was very involved in Washington. He was involved in asking people for gifts, for donations. It's hard to say no to that man. So he was very helpful from a fundraising standpoint. So he was involved in every aspect, and he can talk about that science better than the scientists could. He totally understood what was happening in the test tube and in the petri dish, all the way up until things might be implanted into human beings. He understood all of that and made it his job to do that. He really took everything he had and lived his life through his brains, which he had. He was so incredibly smart, through his talent that he had, that he could express through his acting and directing, and through his advocacy work.
He had this whole other part of him that needed to be nurtured, and that was his artistic life. He was working on this film, directing for HBO. He had plans for writing a book with Random House, which he did. And he was being thought of to be in Rear Window for ABC. And all this was sort of happening at the same time that we were doing all of this foundation work.
Hey, Mark. Hey, Mark. Having Christopher Reeve in Smallville was obviously a highlight. Christopher Reeve is a really great actor. He's a great actor. I mean, he had huge speeches in that. He did in one take.
Greater the risk that you'll expose your secret not only to the Luthers, but to the entire world.
I mean, it was just fantastic and just gave a really good performance.
This kind of thing is something that I'm delighted to sandwich in around all the political work that I'm doing and all the advocacy work, fundraising work, health maintenance, all the things that preoccupy my life mostly. But to get a chance, to act, direct, it makes me feel that I'm not separated from my life before the injury, that there still is a continuity to it, and that really brings me a lot of pleasure.
After my graduation from Harvard in 2000, Chris actually gave me a call and expressed a desire to make a movie about somebody who was facing a circumstance similar to his own. And he was very interested in my life and what I had